Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for season 3 of The Beauty in You. I am so excited for this season. For those that don't know, I am Dr. Mack. And let me tell you, this season we're starting out with something completely different. We're normally live on IG. We're taking it to YouTube. We're taking it to Facebook, and it's going to be an awesome experience. For those that are not familiar with the platform and kind of how this works and what the Beauty in You even is, it is a platform that I created for women to come on and share their journeys with us and express their feelings and talk about their story and their journey. And that's exactly what we're going to do tonight. The person that we are interviewing, this woman we're interviewing tonight, is amazing. Her story is incredible and it touches me a lot. And I love how we can all be in different parts of the United States, different parts of the world, and we all have some type of similarities together as women. As women, we tend to put so much on ourselves and think that we are often going through this journey alone. And I'm here to tell you that we are not. We can all come together and share that story and become even stronger. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my special guest. She grew up in Indiana and graduated from Indiana University in 2021 with a BA in French and Political Science. She then moved to Baltimore, where she attended the University of Maryland School of Law and graduated. She then moved to DC right after, and during her 9 years there, she practiced law and worked in corporate America. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce the one and the only Alyssa Johnson. Hi, Alyssa.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here, Dr. Mack. What an honor and a privilege to be here on your show.
Thank you so much for wanting to be a part of it. I always say I am so honored and so blessed to have women trust me with their journey because it's so personal. And so I'm just so excited that you trust me enough to share it.
Thank you. Of course.
So the Beauty in You, we talk about the beauty that's already in us, that is sometimes it's always there, but we hide it, we bury it, we cover it up. I talked about how you worked in DC for 9 years. You lived in DC 9 years. You worked in corporate America. You studied law. You practiced law. But tell me, what started your self-discovery journey? What was that little, I don't want to say bug in you, but what happened that was
that
like, you know
spark.
What's the spark that was like, you know what, let me get started on this?
Yeah, so I would say it started in 2008 when I was in DC, and when I practiced law, I had a few different legal jobs. But when I worked in big law firm, and traditionally when you work in a big law firm, you're working 80 plus hours a week, and certainly that was my experience. And during that time, the best way to say it is I started becoming interested in spirituality because I was so burnt out. I was like, there has to be more to life than working 80 hours a week. And so I started exploring spirituality and really ended up on a path that just led to natural self-discovery, because as you take those next steps, whether it is through religion or spirituality or something else that's of interest to someone, it naturally lends itself to looking inwards and seeing what is there, what really drives us, really motivates us. And so for a few years while I was in DC, and at this point I was working in corporate America, I wasn't practicing law anymore. I had a really deep spiritual life, a lot of meditation, a lot of heart-centered work, a lot of really exploring sort of greater consciousness, if you will, more than just who I am at the little human being level. Mm-hmm. And then in 2013, I actually had a huge emotional collapse. Now, the collapse actually started in 2012, but I didn't know what it was at the time. I started having severe depression where I could barely get out of bed. I was just upset all of the time. Towards the end, towards 2013, before I left DC, there were times when I just sat down in the sidewalk in the middle of DC and would just cry. And I had no idea what was going on, but obviously I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. And so just because of where I was at in terms of my own emotional development and what was starting to come up, I had to quit my job. I sold my condo, I left DC, and then I really started focusing on trauma healing because I knew, like I said, I knew something was terribly wrong.
So one thing that struck me is when you talk about your depression and not knowing really what it is, but knowing that something is wrong. And that is something I can absolutely relate to. I think for me, it was more of denial. Like I knew something was wrong. I know that it could possibly be depression, but I didn't want to admit that it was that. How did you cope with once you realized, okay, this is really truly depression? How did you deal with that?
I'm not sure I had the vocabulary or the awareness to know that it was depression. If I did, I was very young in my understanding of what it was, just very lacking understanding, lacking information. I knew something seemed wrong when the nature of my job at the time was that I would have appointments around DC, and my condo was in downtown DC. So I could go to the firms, the appointments, the law firms, or the appointments, and come home. And I was like, something seems really weird that I come home and I immediately get back into bed and I like can't move. And I think it took a lot of experiences of that to happen for me to start to realize something is really off here. But it wasn't really until I started having nightmares every night. I started questioning what reality was because of childhood trauma. I couldn't work. I had really, really high levels of fear around certain family members, and I didn't really know why. That it was sort of all of these different pieces that made me finally realize something is off here. And other people could see it, of course, as well. I couldn't hide that. And thankfully, close friends were deeply concerned about what they were seeing in my behavior. And someone recommended a therapist who I have worked with since almost exclusively. So we've had almost a 10-year relationship now, and she specializes in child abuse and childhood trauma, and recommended that I reach out to her and have a chat with her because they were like, something's going on here. And when I had my initial chat with her and she started asking me questions, I think the way she asked questions and the responses was very illuminating for me. Like, oh, this is not, everyday behavior of someone who's feeling really solidly within themselves and in a very healthy mental and emotional state.
Absolutely. Childhood trauma.
Yeah. Fun, huh?
No, my goodness. Was there a time that you may have thought, because it was childhood trauma that you may have suppressed it and it wasn't going to come back up? Or did you think like if you just worked those 80 hours, push it to the side, that you would be able to kind of get through it?
Yes. And I didn't know that it was trauma until about a year into the deep, intense therapy with Jen, who has been my longtime therapist. And it wasn't even her that used the word. I had heard the word before, but it wasn't like anything that was in my awareness or, in my everyday life to the extent that it is now. I was with a friend, and she said something like, well, you had extensive childhood trauma. And when she said that, it was like, oh, I did. I didn't, I had no idea. And so I was aware that things had been bad in childhood, but part of the experience of childhood trauma for many of us is our universe is our family. As children, we don't know that there's anything different. And so if we grow up in a loving home, the world is loving, and it's foreign to a child that another friend may not be treated well. Same thing is true, but the reverse for a child who's growing up in an unloving home. The fact that there could be love in the world or a loving family is foreign to that child, because your family is all that you know, and they represent life for you. So from that perspective, I didn't really know that that anything was really off, or that I had wounds from childhood. And then, like you so beautifully said, you go, like so many of us do, I was working so much, and I was a young lawyer in DC, and it was such a great city to be in, to build a legal career and build a professional reputation. And that's where I put all of my energies, was into working and building that up, and building up credibility, and as well as financial resources, and all sorts of different things. And so I was able to suppress that. And then certainly memories that were repressed were not ready to come up at that point. So they were still repressed, and just focus on what needed to be done in that moment.
First, I want to commend you even for going back, right? So we talk about childhood trauma and going through life. Going forward, we don't ever want to go back. I don't want to visit my past. Don't make me go back and visit my past. Do not make me uncover that. But we need to, right? Like, seriously, like, we go through life and we're like, nope, I'm not touching it. And I'm not touching it. And I'm like, am I really this old dealing with this? And the fact that you were able to not only recognize, well, even go to therapy, stay with it. And even as it got tougher, stay with it and work through it. I mean, I commend you for that, because that's very brave that you're able to even do that. That's not easy.
It's not, but I will say it's been one of the greatest gifts of my life, has been that fortitude and that conviction and the courage and the resources to be able to do it. And quite frankly, it's the resources. It takes tremendous amounts of time. You have to have spaciousness in order to do trauma healing, which is something so many people don't have. It costs money. It's, inner work is not free. And I was blessed to have both, because of the lucrative career I had in DC. So I had built up, financial resources, and I sold my condo. And so I was able to live for a number of years off of money that so many people don't have access to. So when I look at it from that perspective, and the abundance, the money that I had, I look at it from the greater perspective of, part of my work in this lifetime is to actually do this work in a way that so many of my family members could not do for whatever reason. And that I was blessed and I was gifted with these things, because there was such a need to change so many dysfunctional family dynamics. And I look at it as, I was gifted these things, and so it's my responsibility to change them, because I can.
Yep, because you're able to. And I know, going through my own self-discovery, rediscovery, first of all, I'll say it's every day, right? So we learn all these tools. We learn, I call it the tool bag. I put all this stuff in my tool bag, and I carry it around with me every day, because I never know when I'm going to have to pull something out and use it.
I love it.
I always say, like, I'm helping you build your tool bag. But I remember when I was going through my state of depression, and at that time, I'm like, people would say to me, like, oh, your light at the end of the tunnel is going to be so bright. And I'm like, I don't want to hear that crap. I don't want to hear that, right? Because I felt that no one could understand what I was going through, right? Like, no matter what you say your journey was, you cannot relate to me. But because I didn't want to hear it, like, I was just in so much pain. But when I started to see that light that everyone was telling me about, if I would have just listened, I'm like, I did not go through all of this for nothing. I know I did not just go through all this pain and crying and healing for nothing. So I feel like it is my job and my duty to use all the resources that I've been blessed with, and the opportunities that I've had, and the platforms that I've had, to give back. And to help other women, and to let them know that you are not alone. So I feel you when you say that, like, I was blessed with everything that I have, and I'm definitely gonna give that back. So
you are, and that's so beautiful in the way that you're using your painful life experiences as fertilizer and as nutrients to now be of service, because you've changed your relationship to painful life events you've experienced.
Absolutely. What would you say to someone who may kind of know they need to do the work, but they're afraid to do the work? They're afraid of what they may uncover. What would you say to them?
That's such a good question. I had so many fears, and I mean, I still have them, about what I'm going to unearth in my internal being. I think the reality most likely is, when you do this work, you're going to come across things about yourself that you don't like, that are less evolved, that are so angry so punitive, just wanting other people to hurt so badly.
Yeah.
And there may be a very wounded place inside of you that feels like if you go there, you can't come back. And that was one of my great fears, was if I really let go and let all of that pain wash over me and come through me, will my therapist be able to help me come back to myself? And the answer was yes. That was my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, I don't think that's true for everyone, but for me it was. And what we have taught, she and I have talked about this since then, and I will share what she shared with me. In that, when we started working together and I expressed concern about letting those parts of, like, just letting the pain take over, where I don't know if I could come back, she didn't think that was likely to happen, because from her perspective, my desire to heal was stronger or higher than the pain. And so she was pretty confident that that wasn't going to happen. And so when she told me that, to me, I don't want to necessarily say it was a litmus test,
Right.
but I think it was a piece that she was able to look at to see, okay, where do we want her system to go? How far can she go into it before she needs a lifeline, to come back? Right. And so when I hear your question and I understand these fears, and perhaps people listening may have some of them, having, an open conversation, perhaps, interviewing therapists, if that feels like the right next step for you, or different healing modalities. There are so many wonderful ones out there, whatever feels right. And then maybe just tiptoeing, seeing, can I go there? Can I not? What happens if I open up this avenue of anger, or of pain, or of sadness, and maybe set a timer and just see, if I go there for 90 seconds, which sounds short, but it's actually an extraordinarily long amount of time to hold on to an emotion. You probably will find your emotions will move faster than that. And then see like what that's like, and just kind of test the waters. I do think the greatest disservice I could have done for myself is to not go there in my internal being, because that means there are places in me that were still unresolved, unexamined, unaddressed, and there still are. I think it's probably it's impossible to have full consciousness and to like go everywhere, into every nook and cranny into who we are. But the most I have learned, and the most I have grown, and the most that has nourished me and given me strength to do the race literacy work has been looking at those wounded places and working with them, shoring them up, loving them, and letting them morph into whatever was actually supposed to be there, that got covered up or, disrupted because of painful life experiences.
Right. And that's wonderful, like, advice to give. When I laughed when you said the 90 seconds, like, it's a long time, because I remember when I, finally decided to go to therapy, because I was like, no, even though I'm like mental health advocate 100%, right? For everybody else but me at that time, I was like, I'm not going to that. But
you go. I'm
not going. But I got you though, right? That was me. But when I decided, like, okay, you know what, I had to do the work. It was to the point to where I wouldn't be here today if I didn't do the work. Like, yeah, I had to do it. But those 90 seconds, I remember trying to find someone, and literally the way their office answered the phone, if I didn't feel it, if I did not feel like a warm hello, I'm like, nope. And literally, because it mattered to me. So it's like, you say 90 seconds, I'm like, you got 5. I feel, if you don't make me feel comfortable in 5 seconds, I am not working with you. But it does matter. It makes a big difference how they answer the phone, their delivery, how they are, good afternoon, good morning. How are you? I'm so-and-so. How can we help you? Yes. And it's like, okay, you know what? I feel good. I feel the vibe with this one. So 90 seconds, you give them a lot of time. You got 5 with me.
I love it. I mean, that is so beautiful and so clear. Like, I love it.
If you don't
go with 5 seconds. Ignore the 90. Go with 5.
No, but yeah, you have to feel definitely comfortable. One thing you mentioned, you talked about race literacy, but before we get there, or maybe we could tie it into one. Kind of give me what it is and what you're doing now. How we're gonna tie it all into one.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with what race literacy is. as I have learned it, it's really another term for anti-racism work.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the teachers I have studied with, her name is Milagros Phillips, for those who are watching, and she's kind of known as the race healer. She talks about race literacy, and as she defined it, and it really resonated with me, is it's the same thing as anti-racism work, but the energy is different. And so when, anti means you're pushing against something, which is very exhausting. And I am a formerly practicing attorney, and now I work with lawyers on topics related to lawyer well-being, as well as race literacy for white lawyers. And lawyers tend to be exhausted because all they're doing for many of them is pushing, right? They're doing whatever that looks like in their practice. Whereas race literacy, it allows us to kind of sit, I think, differently in the body and open up avenues of learning. Where am I not necessarily literate or understanding of this? It's gentler, and it removes that pushing against energy that Milagros talks about in terms of anti-racism. So really it's the same thing. It's just the way that you're coming at it. And I resonate more with race literacy than the term anti-racism, but I use them interchangeably.
Okay.
And then for how I got onto the race literacy journey.
And walk me through your journey.
And why we're there. Yes. Okay. So that actually started in 2015. So in 2013 is when I left DC and had a huge emotional collapse, couldn't work. And that work was a number of years before I really felt more shored up. Mm-hmm. Well, in 2015, at the beginning of 2015, I moved to Austin, Texas, where I currently live. And in the spring, I was sitting at a park and I was just journaling, and I saw blatant physical child abuse. I mean, just horrific what I saw. And I didn't get triggered. And one of the things I experienced in childhood was physical abuse. And so I noticed, I'm not getting triggered right now. I'm staying really centered. And for those of you, and you may know this, Dr. Mack, you may have experienced this, when you have different emotional responses to things after you've been doing inner work, you notice that, like, oh my gosh, that's kind of a win for me. Not that it was a win for the child, but like, I'm not getting triggered. And that to me is proof that, the inner work is working, even though it's incredibly painful.
Right.
Well, I noticed that, and I actually followed the family, and they happened to live right near the park. And so I went and I saw where they lived, and then I wanted to get additional evidence. I'm a lawyer, so I was like, let's see if I can get some other evidence that maybe something is off here. And so I sat on a stoop and I waited, and I just so happened that like a neighbor came by with her kiddo, and I stopped her and I was like, hey, I saw this thing at the park over there with that family. Do you happen to know them? Is that in alignment? Is there anything there going on that you suspect in terms of child abuse? And I just hit the jackpot with the person I spoke to. She was like, yes, they're terrible to the kiddo. I don't let my own son play with their kiddo anymore because, they're seeing behaviors from the kiddo, of course, who's being abused. So then I filed a report with Child Protective Services, and then it just went wherever it went. I was, removed from the case. I wasn't part of it.
Right.
Well, I was sharing with a friend that I had experienced this, and I didn't get triggered. And she was like, have you ever thought about volunteering with a nonprofit here in Austin that works with kiddos who are in the child welfare system due to abuse or neglect? She was like, I think that you would be an amazing, they're called guardian ad litems. You'd be an amazing guardian ad litem. And I was like, really? I don't know. It sounds, I was still very tender, and there was a lot of unaddressed trauma at that point. I was still very early into my healing journey, but I sat with it. And about 3 months later, I woke up one morning and I was super clear. I was like, I'm supposed to move forward with this. And so I did. And I share all of that because in order to become a volunteer with this nonprofit, before you're even sworn in by the judge into the family court system to be a guardian ad litem, you have to go through 40 hours of training and the background check. Like it's extensive. And in the training, I was exposed to race literacy work. And that was the first time I'd ever really had any exposure to it. And I had your stereotypical fragile white woman response. Wow. I froze. I was like, oh my God, we're not supposed to talk about race. I'm not allowed to say Black person or brown person, right? You don't see color. I mean, it's horrifying looking back, but I had it all. And that was my very first exposure to it. Well, what I learned in training and to this day, what I see it's pervasive. in the child welfare system here in Austin is that the majority population makeup of Austin is white. The vast majority of kiddos in the child welfare system are children of color, mostly brown, but a lot of Black children as well, just because of the, the makeup of Austin is a lot of brown families. And what we should see is proportionality. So I think Austin is like 40 to 45% white. So that's how many children should be in who are white. And then it breaks down after that. But it's not. It's like 85% are children of color, 10% of white. Like it's just very, very, it's disproportionate. The reason is because Austin is racist. That is the only reason that there is a disproportionate number of children of color in the child welfare system here in Austin. Austin is not unique. I suspect pretty much every city across the country is disproportionate in terms of child makeup and population makeup. So with that, the nonprofit I volunteer for heavily and strongly encourages race literacy work. So that's where it all started. Mm-hmm. Now, I did not go down without a fight. I was so attached to the I'm a good white woman story, all the things. I wouldn't be harmful. I treat everyone the same, just all the supremacist messaging that I have been taught, that other white people have been taught, that I had absorbed so deeply. And so my race literacy journey, it took, I want to say, 2 to 3 years for me to really break through the trauma of my race-based trauma, and I'll talk about that more in a second, before I really became much more centered and had inner resiliency to be able to talk about race and racism. And I did all of it so that I would be a better guardian ad litem, because these children, not only have they been traumatized, they're growing up in families, they're having family experiences that are either abusive and or neglectful. But many of them, because of the lack of placements in Texas, meaning homes for them to go to, they may be shipped off to a place in Texas that's like 8 hours away, and they're the only brown child, or they're the only Black child in that entire town. So you're now, you're layering all of these different pieces in. And in order for me to do the best that I can to advocate for these kiddos while they're in CPS's care, I need to be more race literate. Mm-hmm. So I can talk about race-based trauma if you want me to go there.
So I'm going to pause you really quick, because you did a lot of work even getting there.
Okay, I just shared a lot, didn't I?
No, you're fine. You're fine. I love all of it. But even breaking down everything within yourself, were you afraid?
God.
Yeah.
Yes. So part of the work for white women in particular, and white men too, but of course I'm in a feminine body, so I'm going to speak more to the white women experience, is the internal reckoning we have to do that we are so incredibly harmful and violent towards women of color. And this, honestly, it's really an ego construct of the good white women. I had to start piercing that and come to a deeper understanding and realization about how I'm hurtful towards women of color, how I have benefited at the expense of women of color. And I'm going to say people of color, of course, in general, but because it's you and me, I'm going to say mostly to talk about vis-a-vis women of color. And how I've liked it, how I've liked being hurtful, how I like my privilege, and what does that mean for who I am? So there's been so much that has been part of my race literacy journey that I have looked at within myself. None of it is pretty. None of it makes me feel good about myself, but it is absolutely crucial inner work to do in order to really become allies and really stand with people of color. If we're not doing it as white women, we really aren't going to be able to do much in terms of dismantling supremacy.
Absolutely. It's a lot of work.
It is.
And, dealing with it all the time with, other counterparts. I think we talked about it in our pre-interview, because I'm also in the military, and already knowing that my resume has to be 10 times longer than my white counterpart. And we're competing for the same job, but mine has to be longer and more accurate than theirs. Right. That's the way it is. I mean, it's not right, obviously, but it's something that we deal with. So the fact that you did the work, I know that's not easy to do, but when you start working with other women that you may see your past self in, is it harder for them to admit that within themselves? Do you find any resistance with any of the clients that you work with when they come to you?
Yes and no. It's actually both. So I, like I said earlier, I work I do lawyer well-being work, which of course is for lawyers. And I now am becoming more and more focused on race literacy work for white lawyers, really lasering in on white women and white femme lawyers, because I think that we are key to dismantling supremacy. If we can change our allegiance from supremacy and white men who we perceive as powerful, and actually do the inner work and stand within the legal profession, lawyers of color, but certainly beyond the legal profession, people of color, I think that's really the only way supremacy can be dismantled. I could be wrong, but that's the pathway that I'm choosing. So from that perspective, I really just work with white women and white femme lawyers. And what I do that I have not seen other white lawyers do, and let me clarify, there are a lot of white lawyers out there who are doing race literacy work and who are speaking up against racism. I follow a lot of them on LinkedIn, and I mean, the work is great, what I see. I haven't seen any yet who are taking it from a trauma perspective. Yeah. So what I have learned in my race literacy journey is that we all hold race-based trauma, but the way that we hold it depends on our skin color. And white people, we hold it as supremacy. And so what this looks like, and I'm talking about the topmost layers, there's so much underneath the top layers of feeling, but generally speaking, for white men, what is there is anger. For white women, what is there is shame and guilt. And now, like I said, once you start to peel it back and you go in deeper, there's just the whole stuff there. A lot of rage, a lot of victimization feelings, all sorts of things. But that tends to be what presents initially. So when I take it from a trauma lens, what that means is you go very, very slowly. You are constantly checking in with the body. How are you feeling right now? As we talk about this, what is your body experiencing? Do you have memories surfacing? What I find is I do my best to create a really safe container, because certainly for trauma work, you have to have safety is absolutely key. Otherwise, people can't heal from trauma. You can't continually be afraid and being wounded if you're trying to work with trauma. So contain a really safe space. We move slowly. And then with lawyers, one of the messages that we have received as lawyers is that we are supposed to be invincible. We're not allowed to be vulnerable. We're not allowed to be soft. We're not allowed to share things. And this has disastrous consequences. And so if I can open up a space where it's like, okay, what's here? How are we experiencing it? How can you be vulnerable? I have found generally female lawyers tend to really open up if those two criteria are met. They feel safe and they're allowed to be vulnerable. And then I would add another one, I'm not being judgmental. I'm not screaming at them. So what I see a lot of white people doing is screaming at other white people, which I have done. I have never once had success with it. That's why I changed my approach. But when you're screaming at people, I'm like, and I using myself as an example, white people, we need to be doing this, we need to be doing that, blah, 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 blah. Well, we're working with trauma, and that's not the way that you can't meet someone who's in a trauma state at that level. You actually have to come in at a much different place. So when I come at it from that lens, people tend to open up so much more than if I was to come at the screaming approach and like why we suck as white people and adding shame and guilt on top of guilt and shame that we already have. So the answer is no. I mean, there's always, people are afraid to go there. What are we going to discover about ourselves? Because it's most likely not going to be something we want to know. And if the space can be created for that to come out, it will start to come out very slowly. That's okay. But that's what I want. I look at it like I want to create cracks in white consciousness where we can start moving away from messaging of I treat everyone the same. I don't see color. I didn't create racism, so why do I have to do this? I'm a woman, so I experience sexism, which is not the same thing as racism. Moving away from those conversations to actually getting deeper into what's happening and how do we address the race piece, or the racism piece, I should say.
Right. A lot of work.
A lot of work.
Wonderful. But it's all worth it. And the fact that I think it's always amazing how, because I made a note when you were saying like, I had this situation happen, which led to this situation, which led to this training. And then I saw that and then it's like, isn't that amazing how that works out? How you just never know where my journey is going to lead me, but I'm going to go with it and what you find and what you discover about yourself. Because even the work you're doing, like I said, I commend you before because the work within yourself alone, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for you to heal. It's a lot of work to then go through, race literacy. Oh, wait, I'm not racist. That's them. Wait, maybe I am. Maybe I was at one point, I was a part of that problem. I'm not happy about that, but I can truly say that I was a part of that problem. Okay, well, how do I fix this? Or how do I try to make a difference now that I've done the work? And that's what I think is important. Like we go through things in life that's not the best. We do things in life that we're not the proudest of, but we can admit that and we put the work in. And so the fact that you're even doing that and you're still learning more about race literacy, you're willing to share the information and say like, hey, yeah, that was me at one point. I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy to say that I may have enjoyed doing X, Y, and Z. I did, but it wasn't right. But you know what? This is how we can fix that.
Mm-hmm.
You're one person, but you are making some change. It's a long way to go. We've been dealing with this racism a long time. We deal with it each and every day, in some way, shape, or form. As a Black woman, dealing with it each and every day. But at least there's people like you that are trying to make a difference. So,
I don't know. I just say, is this going to feel right if I say it? I think I would love your perspective if you feel like sharing. I think there are a lot of white people who want to do race literacy work, but they don't know that it's trauma. It's just the information. It's not out there. It's not prevalent messaging for white people, right? That white people carry trauma. And so it's then like, how do you do it? And then another, that's one piece is I think there are a lot of people who want to do it. And then I have done the journey pretty much by myself. And of course, as you go through, you have questions. How do I say this? What does this mean? And I have it, just through classes I've taken, both, like I've gone and I've looked for the answers myself, and then I will read materials and work with it until it feels like, or I hear enough of the same thing that I'm like, okay, that tends to be what the answer is. Had I had other people to do the race literacy journey with, I think there would have been places where I could have untangled things a little bit more quickly in my system. I didn't have that. So what I am hoping to create is more of a community where it's like, white women lawyers, where it's like, okay, we can do this together. We can learn together, untangle these things more quickly. So that way we can go to our respective organizations or whatever. And because we're lawyers, we hold so much power and privilege in society and use that to be a part of dismantling supremacy. I'm curious if from your perspective, you see white people wanting to do the race literacy work.
I don't, I can't answer for them, for white people.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that they just have to be willing to go through the journey, and you have to be willing to accept it. So that goes for any self-discovery journey, whether you want to talk about race literacy or you just want to talk about the beauty in you, right? You have to be willing. When I teach self-love, like, why can't I love myself? Because I'm not accepting all the parts of myself. There's, I have to be able to love the good, the bad, the ugly, all of that before I can even receive the love that I deserve. And that, in my mind, the way I see it is that's the same thing. Like, you have to be willing to admit that you are a part of the problem. Like I said, that you have done it, right? That's not me. I don't do that. My best friend's Black, right? How many times have you heard that? And you're like, okay. But you have to be willing to say you're going to do the work, commit to doing the work, and admit to it. And I think if they can do that, we will begin to see some change. But the issue comes into play when it's like, well, that's not me. I didn't do that. I would never do that. And it's like, no, you probably have behind closed doors and we just didn't hear you. But if they're willing to go in and be open and accept it and stay along the path, no matter how ugly it gets, I think we'll be able to see more of that change. That's my perspective.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, absolutely. You have a course coming up. What do you have? Race literacy sources. Tell me what you got.
Yeah. So I have a number of race literacy sources for white people who, if they, if you're just starting your journey or you've been on it, like wherever you're at, these materials will meet you where you're at. It's been my experience. And I wrote them down because there's a lot. So this book is one of the best books I've ever read. And I will be honest that it's the only book that I, after reading, I think just the first chapter, I threw across the room and I cried in bed for 2 days because it hit me so deeply because of my fragile white woman ego. So now I tell every white woman to read it and now I can read it and I love it. But I wasn't at that place in like 2017. So it's got a longer title and it's amazing. It's called Antagonists, Advocates, and Allies: The Wake-Up Call Guide for White Women Who Want to Become Allies with Black Women. And it is by Catrice M. Jackson. So that is a must read for white women, I think. Another one that I think is phenomenal is called Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. And she talks about how the United States is actually a caste system, and every sentence of the book is phenomenal. And then for trauma work, My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. He is a therapist, and he actually breaks down race-based trauma in the Black body, the white body, and the police body. And it's phenomenal how he's done the book. And then for white people, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And I mean, she just does a phenomenal job poking arguments and all of the things that we white people say as to why we aren't doing race literacy work and why we refuse to engage with it. It is great. And then the fifth book is called Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen: The Emotional Lives of Black Women by Dr. Inger Burnett Ziegler. And I read this recently, and she talks about the strong Black woman image and all of the beautiful aspects of it, but also the ways in which Black women's needs are not being met because of society pushing that image on Black women and just saying you're strong, you don't need help or whatever, and or Black women, adopting that image and then not being able to receive help. So I learned so much in terms of the strong Black woman image and what that means, and how can I, as a white woman, not assert my needs over or at the expense of a Black woman's needs. So I love that book. And then there are some classes, some different organizations that people prefer classes. The first is Milagros Phillips. I mentioned her earlier. She's the race healer, and any of her classes are fabulous. I recommend any of them. And then there's an organization called Courageous Conversation, and it was created by a gentleman named Glenn E. Singleton. And it's focused on higher education, but I have taken it and I take what I learn in the courses and actually apply them to legal organizations, and it's a perfectly fine fit. They're so good in terms of how do you have race conversations? How do you open them up within an organization and start to implement policies, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging policies that are truly equitable. And I will say, I think the best training I have ever taken was a few months ago, and it was called Black Women Leading for Racial Equity. And it was through Courageous Conversations. And I was blown away. And I will now stand firmly and I will say, if an organization does not have majority leadership of Black women, your organization is not in the universe of where it can go in terms of potential, in terms of empathy, in terms of what can be done for everyone at large. It was phenomenal. So I'm just going to put my little plug in for that. That's offered again. I will absolutely take it again. And then the third is Melon Eyes. So it's a play on word, Melon Eyes, MELNIZE. But what they've done is they've done Melon and then EYES, Melon Eyes Media. And they're out of San Antonio here in Texas. And they their trainings are phenomenal as well. So those are three. If people prefer trainings, those are all over Zoom. So those are the classes and the books that I recommend for people. And then, if viewers are watching and they want to share any in the comments, of course, there are so many out there. So that's where I'm at with that. And then you also wanted to know about different courses I'm teaching, things like that.
Yeah, what you got going on?
I know what I got going on. Okay. So like I said, most of my work is with lawyers, but I do teach classes, for the general public. And I do have one coming up in a week and a half, and it's called Hocus Focus. And oftentimes, isn't that fun? I just like to make words rhyme. And I also I love portmanteaus as well, which are words that are combined together. And so Hocus Focus is it's going to be an hour and a half long class. And it's really using like our body intelligence to what are our priorities to focus on, how do we accomplish tasks, how do we work with the brain, the emotions, and then I'm going to be talking about pieces around prioritization, motivation, and then a big thing that's a problem with lawyers and elsewhere, but like I said, my community is lawyers, imposter syndrome. How do we work through imposter syndrome?
Oh yeah, that's big.
That's a big. That's right.
On that one.
I got that. Yeah, I think we all do. So that is $100, and that you can learn more on my website, which is alyssajohnson.love. And then my other piece, so I've got that class, and then I do actually have an ask of audience members. So I mentioned the book called Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, The Emotional Lives of Black Women by Dr. Inger Burnett-Ziegler. Now, one of the ways I share my work in the world is I teach continuing legal education courses for two different companies for lawyers. And in one of the companies, I'm moving more and more into like exclusively white allyship continuing legal ed courses with a focus on white women lawyers, changing our allegiance to white men and supremacy and doing our best to dismantle supremacy. And I desire to interview Dr. Burnett-Ziegler for a continuing legal ed course. And I reached out to her via her website about a week and a half ago. Last week, she checked out my LinkedIn page, but I haven't heard back yet. And so if anyone watching this has resonated with anything I've said, or feel free to reach out to me if you want to chat with me more. But if anyone knows her, she is a psychologist and a professor at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. I would love to be connected with her. I can pay her for doing an interview with me for the continuing legal ed course. But I do want to offer that and film that in 2023, where we'll talk about her book. And then we will talk about specifically about Black female lawyers and what that means for the legal profession and how Black female lawyers can take better care of themselves in a paradigm in the legal profession, which is deeply sexist, deeply racist and sexist. So that is my ask. If anyone knows or has a contact with Dr. Burnett-Ziegler, I would love to be introduced.
Y'all know anything, let me know so I can let her know or hit her up so we can get this thing going in 2023. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
That would be absolutely awesome. Hey, do me a favor as well. Send me an email or DM of all the resources so I can link them as well when I repost this. That way, any sources, and if they couldn't write them down fast enough, if you're listening, I'll have everything linked, with this video during the replay so they can get in touch with you for your resources or anything that you mentioned. But yes, we would love to make this happen for you in 2023 and share that information. But I want to thank you so much for being a part of The Beauty in You, for being my season premiere. I really appreciate it. It's been fun. I've learned a lot. And you definitely shared a lot with the audience and definitely gave them a different perspective and just being brave and just sharing your journey, like the good, the bad, the ugly. this is who I was, this is how I used to be, this is who I am now, and this is what I'm now doing. And so to kind of show that progression is the authenticity, if I can get it out of it all, I do appreciate that. I really, really do.
Thank you for creating this. It's such a beautiful space. And you're a phenomenal interviewer, and just what a beautiful offering that you are putting in the world. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Can you let everyone know where they can find you on social media if they want to reach out that way as well?
Yeah. So if you want to, I think Instagram is probably the easiest because, the LinkedIn has got like the whole URL. But you can it's just at Alyssa Johnson 78. And then my website is alyssajohnson.love, LOVE. And I have linked to LinkedIn and Facebook on my website. So you can go to either of those as well.
Yes, y'all. If y'all want to reach out to Miss Johnson, hit her up.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you again. That's it for our interview tonight. I am, like I said, I'm going to reach out to you after this probably and talk to you, but I am very, very thankful for joining me for this hour almost. And yeah, we'll definitely be in touch.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. And thank you all who have watched this. I appreciate you all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Bye.
Talk to you soon. All right, everyone. And that is it for our first episode of The Beauty in You. This season, we have so many other women to interview. So if you have not already, make sure to follow, hit subscribe to YouTube, and hit that notification so you can be made aware of our next one. Be sure to join me October 30th when I interview Isabel Churchill. I'm super excited about that. But again, you guys, I will talk to you soon. Thanks again. Bye.